Harlem, April 25th, 1964. The streets were damp from earlier rain, streetlights glowing soft against the brownstones. Jazz drifted faintly from closed doors, and the city felt like it was finally catching its breath after midnight. This was Bumpy Johnson's Harlem, not the one in the newspapers, but the one that lived and breathed after dark. Bumpy Johnson was 59 years old then, an age most men like him never reached. He had just come back from 11 hard years in Alcatraz. 11 years locked away on a rock surrounded by cold water and colder memories. Every step he took reminded him he wasn't young anymore. His knees ached. His back stiffened. The weight of time sat heavy on his shoulders. He was walking home from Small's Paradise, a long night behind him. A meeting with union men about protecting sanitation workers from mob shakedowns. Not flashy business, not violent business. Just quiet power, handled the Harlem way. The night air was cool. The streets were calm. Bumpy was tired, ready to disappear into the safety of home. Then it happened. A mother's scream stopped Bumpy Johnson in the middle of the street. Not shouting, not arguing, a raw, broken sound that cut through the night like a blade, the kind of scream that doesn't ask for help, the kind that tells you something terrible has already happened. And in that moment, Harlem held its breath. The sound led Bumpy toward the 28th precinct, a hard grey building that had swallowed too many suns in Harlem. That's where he saw her, Ruth Robinson, standing alone on the sidewalk, just outside the station doors. The rain had soaked through her Sunday dress. The fabric clung heavy to her legs. Her face was wet with tears she didn't bother wiping away. She was 42 years old, a housekeeper, a woman who worked 3 jobs and still came up short. Her hands were shaking as she clutched a crumpled arrest paper. Her shoulders sagged, like the weight of the world had finally broken her. She wasn't yelling at anyone anymore. She was just crying. The kind of crying that comes after hope is already gone. Most gangsters would have kept walking. This wasn't mob business. There was no money here, no territory, no respect to be gained. Just another black family crushed by a system that never looked back. Harlem had seen it too many times. Bumpy slowed his step. Then he stopped. In Harlem, you didn't approach a crying woman at night without announcing yourself. That was how trouble started. So he kept his distance. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "are you all right?" Ruth looked up. At first, she didn't recognize him. Then she noticed the hat, the tailored coat, the calm in the way he stood, like a man who belonged exactly where he was. Her eyes widened. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You're Bumpy Johnson." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and at that, her legs gave out. She slid down against the precinct wall, sobbing. "They're killing my baby," she cried. "They're going to kill my Marcus for something he didn't do." Ruth tried to explain through the tears. Her words came broken and uneven, but the story itself was painfully clear. Her son was Marcus Robinson Jr., 19 years old, big heart, gentle soul, a boy who never really grew past childhood. Back then, they didn't use polite words. They just called him slow, and because of that, the world had never been kind to him. 2 nights earlier, Marcus had been walking home from his job at a grocery store in Brooklyn. He was tired, hungry, thinking about nothing more than getting home. That's when 2 white detectives stopped him. They said they just had a few questions. Marcus went with them because he was taught to obey, because he didn't know he was allowed to say no. They kept him in an interrogation room for 22 hours straight. No food, no water, no lawyer, no phone call, just bright lights and angry voices. They told him a white woman had been murdered in Manhattan. Then they showed him pictures, horrible pictures, blood everywhere. They said if he didn't confess, they'd make sure his mother paid the price. Marcus didn't understand what was happening. He was scared, confused, exhausted. He kept saying he didn't do it. He kept saying he wasn't there. But fear wears a man down, especially a boy like Marcus. Eventually they put a paper in front of him, told him to sign it, told him everything would stop if he did. He couldn't even read what he was signing. Now Marcus Robinson Jr. was sitting in a cell, charged with a double murder he didn't commit, held without bail, the district attorney demanding the death penalty, and the system was already moving forward, fast, quiet, like his life had never mattered at all. Bumpy listened without interrupting. He didn't rush her, didn't fill the silence with promises he wasn't sure he could keep. He just stayed there, kneeling on cold concrete, the pain in his knees flaring with every second. When Ruth finally ran out of words, the street went quiet again. For a long moment, Bumpy said nothing. His jaw tightened. His eyes stayed on the pavement. He knew exactly what this meant. He knew the kind of machine she was up against, and he knew what stepping into it would cost him. Then he looked up at her and spoke softly. "Mom, give me 2 weeks. Give me." Those 6 words changed everything. Bumpy Johnson was still on parole. One wrong move, one wrong accusation, and he could be sent straight back to prison. The NYPD already hated him. Getting involved in a murder case meant retaliation, harassment, raids, pressure from every direction. And it wasn't just the police. Digging into a case like this meant stepping on Mafia toes. Someone had framed Marcus for a reason. Someone powerful. Someone protected. The kind of people who didn't forgive interference. Bumpy understood all of that. And still, he made the promise. Not because it was smart, not because it was safe, but because it was right. He knew what it felt like to be locked away while the world moved on. He knew how many innocent men never got a second chance. And he refused to let Marcus Robinson become another quiet statistic. He pulled a crisp $100 bill from his pocket and pressed it into Ruth's trembling hand. "Go home," he told her. "Get some rest. I'll handle the rest." And with that, Bumpy Johnson stood up, turned away from the precinct, and stepped into a war he didn't have to fight. The next morning, Bumpy Johnson called a quiet meeting. No guns on the table, no shouting, just minds at work. The back room of a small soul food spot on Lenox Avenue became the war room. This was where Harlem's problems were solved without noise. 3 people answered the call. First was Frank Lucas, young, sharp, hungry to prove himself. Frank knew the streets better than most men twice his age. If there was information moving through Harlem, Frank could find it. He'd be the legs. The one knocking on doors and asking the questions no one else would. Next came Nat Pettigrew, a former cop, one of the few who'd been thrown off the force for refusing bribes instead of taking them. Nat understood the NYPD from the inside. He knew how cases were buried, how reports disappeared, and which detectives couldn't be trusted. If the police were dirty, Nat would smell it first. The last to arrive was Stephanie St. Clair, the Queen herself. Older now, slower in her steps, but her mind was still razor sharp. Judges, lawyers, journalists. People listened when Stephanie spoke. If truth needed a path into the legal world, she knew exactly where to push. Bumpy laid it all out. No dramatics, no emotion, just facts. "Marcus Robinson didn't kill those women," he said. "But somebody wants the world to believe he did. And I want to know why." Frank shifted in his seat. "Boss, with respect," he said. "This ain't our business." Bumpy's eyes hardened. His voice stayed calm. "When a black kid gets railroaded, it is our business. Because today it's him. Tomorrow it's one of us." The room went quiet. Then Bumpy gave them their moves. Find the real killer, find the cops protecting him, and prove Marcus Robinson was nowhere near Manhattan that day. The game had begun. The work started quietly. No headlines, no sirens, just patience. Frank Lucas took the streets first. He didn't rush. He listened. He talked to doormen, neighbors, delivery men, anyone who had been near the Upper East Side building the day those women were killed. Most people were scared. Some were angry, but a few remembered things the police never bothered to ask. One name kept coming up, the doorman. A Polish immigrant who had worked that building for years. He told Frank something that never made it into any report. On the afternoon of the murders, he saw a white man leave the building, blood on his clothes. an expensive suit. He watched him step into a black Cadillac and drive away. When Frank asked if he told the police, the man just shook his head. "They didn't ask," he said. "They only wanted to know if I saw any black men." While Frank was working the streets, Nat Pettigrew was digging into police files that weren't supposed to be dug into. He leaned on old contacts, men who still trusted him. What he found made his stomach turn. The lead detective on the case was Frank Sullivan, a name everyone on the force knew. Sullivan was dirty, on the payroll of the Genovese family, a cop who made evidence disappear when the price was right. Nat followed the money, followed the favors, and that's when another name surfaced: Johnny Scar Mancini, a small-time burglar, a junkie, a man with a scar on his left cheek. Mancini had been arrested 3 times in the past year, and every single time Detective Sullivan had him released. Protection like that wasn't free. At the same time, Stephanie St. Clair was working a different angle. Phones rang, doors opened. Quiet conversations took place in offices far from Harlem. She found a young civil rights lawyer willing to listen, someone not yet broken by the system, someone who still believed truth mattered. Stephanie didn't make promises. She just placed pieces on the board. And slowly, the picture began to form. It took 3 days to find Johnny Mancini. Junkies talk when they're desperate, and Frank Lucas knew who to listen to. Mancini was hiding in a shooting gallery on the Lower East Side, barely conscious, arms marked with needles, a shell of a man drowning in his own addiction. They didn't rough him up. They didn't threaten him. They just pulled him out of the room and into a quiet alley. Bumpy Johnson was waiting, calm, still, looking at Mancini like he already knew the truth. Johnny had a scar on his left cheek, the same one the doorman described. His suit from that day was long gone, but the memory of it wasn't. Expensive, blood-covered, impossible to forget. Bumpy spoke slowly. "You're going to tell me what happened," he said. "Not because I'm forcing you, but because the truth is already catching up to you." Mancini's hands started shaking. His voice cracked. Tears cut lines through the dirt on his face. "I didn't mean to kill them." He said he broke in to steal, said the women woke up and screamed, said he panicked. High out of his mind, he stabbed until the noise stopped, and when it was over, Detective Sullivan told him he'd be protected if he kept quiet. Bumpy turned on the tape recorder. No drama, no raised voices, just the truth being spoken into the dark. For 45 minutes, Johnny Mancini confessed every detail: the break-in, the murders, the cover-up. When the tape clicked off, the room went silent. Bumpy had what he needed, but the hardest part was still ahead. Bumpy Johnson walked into the Manhattan District Attorney's office with measured steps, the tape recorder under one arm, a stack of affidavits in the other. Beside him, David Coleman, the young civil rights lawyer, kept his eyes fixed on the floor. They didn't knock. They didn't announce themselves. They just walked in. Calm, certain, dangerous in the quietest way possible. The DA looked up, startled. His eyes scanned Bumpy. Then the tape. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Bumpy didn't answer the question. "That doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is you have an innocent kid on death row and the real killer walking free because one of your detectives is corrupt." He pressed play. The voices of Johnny Mancini, trembling and guilty, filled the office. Each word hit like a hammer. The DA's face went pale. Papers on his desk shifted under his trembling hands. Silence followed the tape, heavy, uneasy, like the city itself was holding its breath. Finally, the DA picked up the phone. His voice tight, formal. "Get me Detective Sullivan now." Bumpy stood back, waiting, watching. The gears of the system grind, just enough to crack, but not enough to collapse. Within hours, Marcus Robinson was released. Charges dropped. Johnny Scar Mancini was arrested and eventually convicted. Detective Frank Sullivan, he was never charged. Too many friends in high places, but quietly, without headlines or fanfare, he was forced into retirement. The system remained, but its armor had cracks, and Bumpy Johnson had exposed them. Harlem watched, and the streets understood something newspapers never printed. Justice didn't always come from the courthouse. Sometimes it came from the man willing to step in when no one else would. Marcus Robinson walked out of the Manhattan courthouse a free man. The sun was low, painting the streets of Harlem gold. Ruth Robinson ran toward him, tears streaming down her face. She wrapped her arms around her son, sobbing into his chest. Relief, fear, and gratitude all pouring out at once. Bumpy Johnson stood a few steps away, silent, watching, letting the moment speak for itself. Ruth turned to Bumpy, clutching his coat, her voice shaking. "You saved my boy's life." Bumpy just nodded. "That's what we do in Harlem, ma'am. We protect our own." Marcus never forgot what Bumpy had done. Years later, he named his first son Ellsworth, Bumpy's real first name, a quiet tribute to the man who had given him a second chance. Harlem never forgot either. In barbershops, in churches, in whispered conversations on stoops, people told the story again and again. They never wrote about it in the newspapers, but everyone who mattered knew the truth, that sometimes the people the system called criminals were the ones with the real honor. And on that spring night in 1964, Bumpy Johnson reminded Harlem that someone was still watching out for them.